My ex-wife's new husband tried to replace me as dad. Then the truth about his past emerged. I, 38M, never thought I'd be writing this kind of post, but the events of the past year have been so surreal that I need to get this off my chest. My ex-wife and I divorced 3 years ago after 12 years of marriage. The split was relatively amicable. No screaming matches, no bitter custody battles, just two people acknowledging we'd grown apart. We share custody of our 2 kids, and we'd managed to maintain a decent co-parenting relationship. That was until she married Steve last year, and everything went to hell. I should have seen the red flags earlier. My ex met Steve at some charity gala, and their relationship moved suspiciously fast. Within 6 months, they were engaged. When I expressed concern about the pace to my ex during a kid handoff, she brushed it off, saying that when you know. The kids seemed okay with him initially. He bought them expensive gifts, took them to theme parks, and generally played the role of fun guy perfectly. The wedding was lavish, way more extravagant than anything my ex would typically go for. Steve insisted on paying for everything, throwing around mentions of his successful finance career and investment portfolio. I attended for the kids' sake, and something felt off about how he kept emphasizing his wealth to everyone. But I kept my mouth shut. Not my circus, not my monkeys anymore, right? The changes started subtly. First, it was small comments to the kids during their time at their mom's house. My daughter mentioned that Steve told her she was lucky to finally have a real father figure. My son said Steve promised to teach him what it means to be a real man, implying I hadn't done that job. I wrote it off as new stepdad awkwardness, though it bothered me. Then came the school incidents. I showed up at my son's soccer game wearing my usual Team Dad shirt, only to find Steve there in a custom World's Greatest Dad jersey with my son's number on it. He'd never even attended a practice. During my daughter's piano recital, he tried to sit in the immediate family-only front row and argued with the organizer when she directed him to the general seating area, making a scene about being just as much her father now. The real problems started when he began interfering with our custody arrangement. Suddenly, my ex was too busy to discuss schedule swaps directly. Every conversation had to go through Steve. He'd answer her phone, claiming she was indisposed. My texts about picking up the kids would be answered from her number, but the writing style was clearly his. When I finally got through to my ex about this, she seemed evasive, saying Steve was just trying to help manage communication. Things escalated when he started showing up at my kids' therapy sessions that were specifically set up to help them process the divorce. The therapist contacted me privately, concerned about his attempts to sit in on confidential sessions and his insistence that the kids' attachment to their biological father was holding them back from fully bonding with their new family. The school situation became increasingly hostile. Steve tried to register himself as the primary contact, attempting to remove me from the emergency contact list entirely. When the school refused without my consent, he sent a series of aggressive emails to the administration about toxic masculinity in the education system and how they were enabling an absentee father. I only found out because the principal reached out to me, worried about the situation. Then came the legal harassment. Steve hired a lawyer to review our custody agreement, claiming my influence was destabilizing the new family unit. The lawyer sent threatening letters about reduced visitation, supervised visits only, and even suggested I was alienating the children from their mother. It was all completely false, but fighting these accusations was draining both emotionally and financially. My breaking point came during my son's 10th birthday. I'd planned a special father-son camping trip, something we'd been talking about for months. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Steve took him to buy a brand new PS5 and gaming setup. He convinced my son to cancel our trip, saying, "Wouldn't you rather play games with your new dad than sleep in the dirt?" When my son called to cancel, I could hear Steve coaching his words in the background. That's when my sister, who works in corporate background screening, offered to do some digging. She'd been suspicious of Steve from the start, noting how his stories about his business success seemed to change depending on the audience. What she uncovered was worse than any of us could have imagined. Steve's entire identity was essentially a fiction. His real name was Steven, and he'd changed it slightly after a series of fraud charges in 2018. His successful finance career was a complete fabrication. He'd been fired from 3 firms for lying about his credentials and mishandling client funds. But that wasn't even the worst part. He had an ex-wife and 3 kids in Montana. He'd abandoned them 5 years ago, leaving them with massive debt and unpaid child support. His ex-wife there had an eerily similar story. He'd swooped in when she was vulnerable after her first husband's death, love-bombed her and the kids with expensive gifts and trips, then gradually isolated her from family and friends. When the debts caught up and his lies unraveled, he vanished overnight. Even more disturbing, we found a pattern. Before Montana, there was another family in Oregon. Same storyline, single mom, fast romance, financial fraud, disappearance. He'd gotten better at hiding his tracks each time, which is why background checks hadn't caught it earlier. I took this information to my ex-wife, meeting her for coffee while the kids were at school. I was worried she wouldn't believe me, but I had brought everything: court documents, news clippings about the fraud charges, statements from his previous victims, even photos of his other families. The look on her face as she went through the evidence still haunts me. She broke down, revealing that their joint accounts were nearly empty. He'd been borrowing money for months, always with elaborate stories about investment opportunities and guaranteed returns. The confrontation with Steve was like watching a masterclass in manipulation. When presented with the evidence, he tried every trick in the book. First came the denial. We had the wrong person. It was identity theft. Someone was framing him. When that didn't work, he switched to tears and remorse. He'd changed. He was making amends. He'd pay everyone back. Finally, when he realized we weren't buying it, came the threats. He'd fight the allegations, ruin us financially with legal battles, tell the kids we were trying to destroy their real family. My ex showed unexpected strength. She'd already contacted his previous families and frozen their remaining assets. She had an emergency meeting with her lawyer and filed for annulment the next day. Steve disappeared within a week, taking what little he could grab, leaving behind a trail of debt and broken trust. The aftermath has been challenging. My ex is dealing with significant financial damage. He'd taken out loans in her name, maxed out credit cards, even tried to refinance her house without her knowledge. The kids are struggling to process the betrayal, especially my son, who had started to really look up to Steve. They're both in therapy, working through their trust issues. But there's been an unexpected silver lining. This crisis has actually brought my ex and me closer as co-parents. We've established better communication, stronger boundaries, and a united front in protecting our kids. We're more honest with each other now, more willing to listen to each other's concerns about the kids' well-being. Looking back, I realize how crucial it was to trust my instincts. Someone trying to erase a parent from their children's lives isn't showing love, they're showing control. A person who truly cares about kids will support their relationships with both parents, not try to replace or eliminate one. Edit. Thank you for all the support and awards. To address some common questions, yes, we've reported him to the authorities and are working with law enforcement in multiple states. Yes, we're helping his previous families locate him for the unpaid child support and fraud charges. My ex is working with a financial advisor and legal team to recover what she can. Edit 2. Many have asked about red flags we missed. Looking back, there were several. He rushed the relationship incredibly fast. He love-bombed everyone with expensive gifts. His stories about his background would change slightly depending on who he was talking to. He always had elaborate explanations for why he couldn't provide certain documentation or why his investments needed immediate cash. He was incredibly charming but would become defensive if anyone questioned his stories too deeply. Edit 3. Update. His first wife from Montana reached out. Apparently, he's tried this same scam in 2 other states we didn't know about. There's now a multi-state investigation into his activities. My ex has joined a support group for financial fraud victims, which is helping her process everything. The kids are doing better in therapy, and we're all taking things one day at a time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.